My name is Beverly. I'm 34 years old, and until last year I thought I knew my family. When my father passed away after his battle with cancer, I never imagined my own brother would drag me to court over Dad's will. The pain of losing my father was eclipsed only by the betrayal of Harold trying to take everything our father left behind. But Dad, always thinking ahead, left something none of us expected: a sealed letter that would change everything. When the judge opened it in that packed courtroom, what happened next left everyone speechless. Before I tell you how this family nightmare unfolded, let me know where you're watching from. Give this video a like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when nobody else would. Growing up in our middle-class neighborhood in Minnesota, I always felt closest to my dad. Richard was a respected accountant in our community, known for his integrity and attention to detail. He taught me about financial responsibility from an early age, showing me how to balance a checkbook before I even started high school. Those quiet moments at the kitchen table going over numbers are some of my most cherished memories. My relationship with my older brother Harold was different. 4 years older than me, Harold always seemed to feel entitled to more than what he had. When we were kids, he would complain about getting the same allowance as me despite being older. As teenagers, he resented sharing the family car. There was always tension bubbling beneath the surface, though Dad worked hard to treat us equally. Our family dynamic changed forever when Mom got sick. Doris was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer when I was 14. After 2 years of treatments that drained her physically and emotionally, she passed away when I was 16. Watching her decline was devastating, but it brought Dad and me even closer. Harold, 18 at the time, seemed to withdraw emotionally, spending more time with friends and less at home. After Mom died, Dad dedicated himself entirely to raising us. He never dated again, pouring all his energy into being both parents. He worked longer hours to put me through college, attending every school event despite his exhaustion. Harold, meanwhile, left for college in Chicago and rarely came home even during holidays. I became an elementary school teacher, settling just 20 minutes from Dad's house. Every Sunday we would have dinner together, and I helped him maintain the house as he got older. Harold built a life in Chicago, starting various business ventures he claimed were always on the verge of success. He would call Dad occasionally, conversations that often ended with Dad looking worried and checking his bank account. When Dad turned 68, he started experiencing back pain and unexplained weight loss. The diagnosis was devastating: pancreatic cancer, already advanced. The doctors gave him 6 months to a year. I immediately took a leave of absence from my teaching position to care for him, moving temporarily back into my childhood home. Those final months were precious despite the circumstances. Dad remained positive, even as the cancer weakened him. We spent evenings looking through old family albums, and he shared stories about his life I had never heard before. During this time, Harold visited only 3 times, each visit brief and awkward. I noticed that whenever Harold did come, the conversation inevitably turned to money, investments, or the value of Dad's house. One afternoon, while Dad was having a relatively good day, he asked me to drive him to his lawyer's office. Marvin had been Dad's friend since college and handled all his legal matters. Dad insisted on going alone into Marvin's office, spending nearly 2 hours inside while I waited in the reception area. When he emerged, he seemed relieved, as if he'd lifted a weight off his shoulders. "Just getting my affairs in order, Bev," he said, squeezing my hand. "Nothing for you to worry about now." As the weeks passed, Dad's condition deteriorated rapidly. The hospice nurse visited daily, adjusting his medications to keep him comfortable. I read to him from his favorite books when he was too tired to hold them himself. Harold called occasionally, but always had an excuse for why he couldn't visit: business meetings, travel conflicts, minor illnesses of his own. Dad passed peacefully in his sleep on a quiet Tuesday morning in October. I was holding his hand, having dozed off in the chair beside his bed. The house felt impossibly empty afterward, despite relatives and neighbors bringing casseroles and sharing condolences. Harold arrived the day before the funeral, staying at a hotel rather than at the house. At the service, he seemed distracted, checking his phone repeatedly. When people shared memories of Dad, Harold remained silent. After most guests had left the reception, I overheard him asking Marvin about when the will would be read. The coldness of his concern just hours after we'd buried our father sent a chill through me. 2 weeks after the funeral, Marvin invited both Harold and me to his office for the reading of the will. The small conference room felt stuffy despite the autumn chill outside. Harold arrived in an expensive suit, his handshake brief when greeting me. We sat on opposite sides of the table as Marvin entered carrying a leather folder. "Before I begin," Marvin said, adjusting his glasses, "I want to express again how sorry I am for your loss. Richard was not just a client but a dear friend." Marvin outlined the estate, the family home appraised at approximately $350,000, Dad's retirement savings of $240,000, and a small lake cabin in northern Minnesota worth about $180,000. Dad had purchased the cabin just 5 years earlier, fulfilling a lifelong dream of having a place on the water. "Richard's will is straightforward," Marvin continued. "The family home goes to Beverly, the lake cabin to Harold, and the retirement savings are to be divided equally between both children." I nodded, not surprised. Dad knew I loved the family home and had mentioned leaving it to me several times. The equal split of his savings seemed fair, and Harold had always enjoyed the outdoors more than I did. The cabin seemed a perfect fit for him. But as Marvin finished speaking, Harold's face flushed dark red. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, slapping his hand on the table. "She manipulated him while he was dying. This will doesn't reflect what Dad really wanted." I stared at my brother in shock. "Harold, what are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about. Living with him, playing nurse, whispering in his ear daily about how much you loved the house, how much you needed security." His voice rose with each accusation. "Meanwhile, I'm building a business, creating a legacy Dad would have been proud of. I needed that capital from the house to expand." "Your father was of sound mind when he signed this document," Marvin interjected firmly. "He considered his decisions carefully." Harold stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Dad promised me years ago that I would get the house. Beverly manipulated him when he was vulnerable and dying. I'll contest this." "Harold, Dad never promised you the house," I said, my voice shaking. "He told me multiple times he wanted me to have it. You've barely visited in years." "Because I was working," Harold shouted, "creating something. While you were playing house with Dad, I was building a future. You took advantage of his weakness." "That's enough," Marvin said sharply. "Richard made his wishes clear and they're legally documented." Harold pointed a finger at me. "You're not getting away with this. I'm contesting the will. You'll be hearing from my attorney." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I sat, frozen, tears welling in my eyes. The accusations felt like physical blows. How could Harold believe I would manipulate our father? I had put my career on hold to care for Dad because I loved him, not because I expected anything in return. Marvin gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "Beverly, I'm so sorry. Sometimes grief manifests as anger, but this is beyond acceptable." "Do you think he's serious about contesting the will?" I asked, wiping away tears. Marvin sighed heavily. "Unfortunately, yes. Harold has always been stubborn. But there's something else you should know." He lowered his voice, though we were alone in the room. "Your father anticipated this might happen. He left a sealed letter with me with explicit instructions that it only be opened if Harold contested the will." A letter? Dad never mentioned anything about a letter to me. "He was protecting both of you in his own way." Marvin's expression was unreadable. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." As I drove home, Harold's accusations echoed in my mind. How could he twist my care for our father into something manipulative and self-serving? The brother I'd grown up with, despite our differences, would never have said such cruel things. The pain of Dad's loss was still raw, and now this betrayal added a new dimension of grief I wasn't prepared to handle. That night alone in the house that was now officially mine, I walked through each room touching Dad's belongings, wondering what he would advise me to do in this situation. In his study, I found a framed photo of all four of us from before Mom got sick. We looked happy normal, unaware of the fractures that would eventually split our family apart. I held the picture to my chest and finally allowed myself to sob. The official notice of Harold's lawsuit arrived exactly 1 month after our meeting with Marvin. The legal document was full of cold formal language alleging undue influence and manipulation of a vulnerable individual. Reading Harold's accusations, formalized in legal terms, made me physically ill. I had to rush to the bathroom where I vomited until there was nothing left but bile and tears. With shaking hands, I called Marvin, who recommended I hire my own attorney, someone who specialized in estate disputes. "This isn't my area of expertise, Beverly. You need the best representation possible." That afternoon, I met with Susan, a sharp-eyed attorney with 20 years of experience in estate litigation. Her office was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold legal documents clutched in my hand. "I won't sugarcoat this," Susan said after reviewing the case. "Contest cases can be brutal, expensive, and emotionally draining. They can take months, sometimes years, to resolve. Are you prepared for that?" "I don't have a choice," I replied. "I can't let Harold distort Dad's wishes and paint me as some kind of manipulator." Susan nodded approvingly. "Then we'll fight. But you need to understand what's coming. Harold has hired Theodore Wells from Blackstone and Associates in Chicago. They're known for aggressive tactics." The following weeks unfolded like a nightmare. Harold refused to speak to me directly, communicating only through his attorney. At our first four-way meeting, he wouldn't even make eye contact, staring at his phone while Theodore presented their settlement offer. I would surrender the house, receiving just 30% of the total estate value. "That's absurd," Susan responded calmly. "My client rejects this offer entirely." Theodore smiled thinly. "Then we'll see you in court, where we'll demonstrate how Ms. Parker manipulated her vulnerable father during his final months." The discovery process revealed aspects of Harold's life I hadn't known. His business ventures weren't just struggling, they were failing. He had significant debt, multiple maxed-out credit cards, and a luxury apartment in Chicago he could barely afford. Financial desperation, Susan suggested, was likely driving his determination to secure the entire inheritance. As the legal battle intensified, Harold escalated his campaign against me. He contacted extended family members, telling them I had manipulated Dad, prevented Harold from visiting, and deliberately isolated our father to secure the inheritance. Aunt Geraldine, Mom's sister, called me in tears, asking how I could do such a thing. Cousin Gary stopped returning my calls. The family I had counted on for support was pulling away based on Harold's lies. My best friend Linda and my colleague Janet became my lifeline. Linda brought dinner twice a week, making sure I ate when I forgot to care for myself. Janet covered my classes when I needed to meet with Susan, never asking for details but offering silent support. As the court date approached, my anxiety spiraled. I had nightmares where I was locked in a glass box, screaming, while Harold and Theodore pointed accusingly, but no sound emerged. I lost weight, my clothes hanging loosely on my frame. The dark circles under my eyes seemed permanent fixtures. One afternoon, while gathering documents, Susan requested I discovered a box of old letters in Dad's office. Among them were numerous notes from Harold over the years, each requesting financial assistance for various business ventures. Dad had apparently been sending Harold money regularly, thousands of dollars that were never mentioned to me. This realization strengthened my resolve to fight no matter the cost. By the time we approached the 6th month of legal proceedings, I was emotionally and financially drained. The legal fees had already depleted most of my savings, forcing me to take a weekend job at a local bookstore just to keep up with the mounting bills. My second-grade students noticed the change in me, asking why my smile didn't reach my eyes anymore. The physical toll was becoming impossible to ignore. I'd lost 15 pounds from my already slim frame, my clothes hanging loosely. Sleep became a luxury I rarely enjoyed, averaging 3 to 4 hours of restless tossing each night. The anxiety attack started after the break-in, the first one, hitting me in the grocery store when I spotted someone who looked like Harold from behind. My heart raced so fast, I thought I was having a heart attack, my vision tunneling as I gasped for breath against a display of canned soup.
Linda became my unofficial caretaker, practically forcing me to take breaks from the legal paperwork that consumed my evenings. "You're going to kill yourself before this even gets to court," she insisted, dragging me out for walks around the lake near my apartment. "Your dad wouldn't want this." She was right, of course. One evening, after a particularly draining phone call with Susan about additional documentation requests, I pulled out an old photo album. There was Dad teaching me to ride a bike, his face a mixture of pride and concern. Another showed him at my college graduation, beaming as I held my diploma. Each image captured his integrity, his kindness, his complete lack of the manipulation Harold accused me of. I remembered a camping trip when I was 12 when another family tried to claim the site Dad had reserved. Rather than creating a scene, Dad calmly showed his confirmation, then offered to help them find another spot.
Standing up for what's right doesn't mean you have to be unkind, he told me later as we roasted marshmallows. Integrity matters more than winning. To bolster our case, I reached out to Dad's old friends, people who had known him for decades. His poker buddies, former colleagues, our longtime neighbors, all readily agreed to serve as character witnesses, outraged at Harold's accusations. Mr. Johnson next door had tears in his eyes when I explained the situation. "Your father was the most honest man I ever knew," he said, gripping my hand. "And he was so proud of you, Beverly. Never doubt that." The deposition with Theodore was brutal. For 6 hours, he tried to paint me as a calculating manipulator who had isolated my father to influence his financial decisions. He twisted every act of care into something sinister. "So you quit your job to move in with your father?" Theodore asked, his tone implying something inappropriate. "I took a leave of absence to care for my dying father," I corrected. "And during this time, you had unlimited access to influence his decisions, correct?" "I had the privilege of making his final months comfortable," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. By the time I returned to school, the stress was affecting my teaching. I forgot details of lessons I'd taught for years, lost track of conversations mid-sentence, and once found myself staring blankly at my classroom of concerned 7-year-olds, unable to remember what subject we were studying. Principal Wayne called me into his office after that incident, but instead of the reprimand, I expected he offered compassion. "My mother died last year," he said quietly. "The grief alone nearly broke me, and I didn't have a lawsuit on top of it. Let me adjust your schedule, give you some support." His kindness nearly undid me. I broke down in his office, releasing months of pent-up emotions. Wayne arranged for another teacher to take my afternoon classes 3 days a week, giving me time for legal appointments without further depleting my sick leave. As the legal bills mounted, I faced a painful decision. Dad had left me several family heirlooms, including Grandma's diamond earrings and Mom's pearl necklace. The jewelry appraised at enough to cover the next round of legal fees. Selling these treasures felt like losing another piece of my parents, but I couldn't see another option. Through the discovery process, we learned more about Harold's financial situation. Not only had his current business failed, but he had started and bankrupted 3 previous companies. He owed nearly $200,000 to various creditors, and there was evidence he had gambling debts as well. His desperation for Dad's money started making more sense, though it didn't excuse his actions. As the pressure intensified, Theodore's tactics became increasingly intimidating. He sent daily emails demanding additional documents, scheduled last-minute depositions, and once called at 11 p.m. to discuss settlement options, his voice suggesting I was being unreasonable by continuing to fight. After a particularly harsh letter outlining all the ways they planned to destroy my character in court, I nearly gave up. I called Susan, my voice breaking. "Maybe I should just settle. Give him the house, keep the cabin. I can't keep doing this." "That's exactly what they want," Susan replied firmly. "They're trying to break you down. But we have the truth on our side, Beverly. Don't give up now." That night, Marvin called unexpectedly. "I've been thinking about you," he said, his voice gentle. "Richard would be proud of how you're standing up for yourself." "I'm not sure I can keep going," I admitted. There was a pause before Marvin responded. "Remember the sealed letter I mentioned? Your father knew Harold better than anyone. He anticipated this might happen and prepared for it. Trust in that, Beverly. Trust in him." Somehow that reminder about the mysterious letter gave me renewed strength. I remembered Dad's favorite saying when facing difficulties: "The truth doesn't always come easy, but it always comes out in the end." With the court date just 2 weeks away, I decided to see this through no matter the cost. The morning of the trial dawned crisp and clear, a beautiful October day that seemed at odds with the knot of anxiety in my stomach. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night rehearsing answers to potential questions. My hands shook so badly, I spilled coffee down my carefully chosen navy blue blazer, forcing a last-minute change of clothes. The county courthouse was an imposing stone building downtown, its formal atmosphere intensifying my nervousness. Susan met me on the steps, her calm presence anchoring me as we walked through security and found our assigned courtroom. The polished wooden benches, high ceiling, and formal atmosphere made my mouth go dry. "Remember," Susan whispered, "just tell the truth. Answer only what's asked. Don't volunteer information, and take your time. We've prepared for this." Harold and Theodore arrived minutes later, both in expensive suits that made my department store outfit feel inadequate. Harold looked confident, even smug, not sparing me a glance as they took their seats at the opposite table. Theodore immediately began arranging documents with theatrical precision, occasionally murmuring something that made Harold nod vigorously. My small support system filled the bench directly behind me: Linda, who had taken the day off work; Marvin, looking solemn in his best suit; and two of my teacher colleagues who had arranged substitutes to be here. Their presence helped steady my racing heart. Judge Phyllis Henderson entered, a stern-looking woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. Everyone rose as she took her seat, her sharp eyes scanning the courtroom before she nodded for proceedings to begin. Theodore's opening statement painted me as a manipulative caretaker who had isolated a vulnerable man to secure an inheritance. Richard Parker was not of sound mind in his final months, he declared dramatically. Weakened by cancer and medications, he was susceptible to the constant influence of the defendant, who used her position of trust to secure the lion's share of his estate at the expense of my client, who was deliberately kept at a distance. Susan's response was measured and dignified. She emphasized Dad's mental clarity until his final weeks, his careful estate planning with Marvin's guidance, and his consistent statements about wanting me to have the family home. "This case," she concluded, "is not about undue influence, but about honoring a father's clearly expressed wishes for the children he loved." Harold was the first witness, skillfully guided by Theodore through a narrative that barely resembled reality. According to his testimony, he had been extremely close to Dad but was systematically prevented from visiting during the illness. He claimed Dad had always promised him the family home as the eldest son, and that I had manipulated those final months to change his mind. My sister controlled who could visit, when they could visit, and what information reached my father. Harold stated, his voice catching in what seemed like rehearsed emotion. I would call and be told he was too tired to talk, only to find out later he'd been alert and asking for me. It took every ounce of self-control not to shout objections from my seat. The lies piled up, each more outrageous than the last. Harold claimed Dad had promised to fund his latest business venture with the proceeds from the house sale after his death, that I had deliberately hidden Dad's phone to prevent communication, and that I had threatened to abandon Dad's care if he didn't change his will in my favor. Theodore presented what he called evidence of my manipulation, a nurse's note about Dad being tired after one of Harold's visits, which Theodore twisted to suggest I had emotionally exhausted Dad by turning him against Harold. Emails where I declined Harold's requests to visit, because Dad was undergoing treatment, presented as proof I was blocking access. When my turn came to testify, my voice initially trembled so badly I had to restart my first response. But as I spoke about caring for Dad, reading to him from his favorite mystery novels, helping the hospice nurse change his medications, the words began to flow more easily. I described our Sunday dinners before his illness, the family traditions we maintained even after Mom died, and his clear statements about wanting me to have the house where I'd grown up. Theodore's cross-examination was brutal. He paced before me like a predator, firing questions designed to provoke emotional responses. Isn't it true that you quit your job specifically to position yourself as your father's primary caregiver and influence his decisions? No. I took family leave to care for my dying father because I loved him. Isn't it true that you deliberately scheduled your brother's visits when your father was most medicated and least lucid? Absolutely not. Harold rarely visited despite multiple invitations. For each accusation, I had a truthful response, but Theodore's rapid-fire approach left me feeling battered. By the time I stepped down, I was emotionally exhausted, unsure how the judge had received my testimony. The character witnesses provided much-needed support to our case. Dad's doctor testified to his mental clarity and decision-making capacity. Our neighbors described my dedicated care and Harold's notable absence. Dad's best friend recounted conversations where Dad explicitly stated his intention to leave me the house, because Beverly loves it and will care for it. Then came Theodore's surprise witness, our cousin Donna. I hadn't even known she was in the courtroom. As she took the stand, she avoided my gaze, focusing instead on Harold, who gave her an encouraging nod. I visited Uncle Richard about 2 months before he passed, Donna testified. When Beverly left the room, he confided in me that he felt pressured to change his will. He seemed afraid to upset her since she was his caretaker. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Donna and I had been close as children, though we'd drifted apart as adults. How could she lie so blatantly? Dad had always found her gossipy nature tiresome and rarely spent time alone with her. During a brief recess, Susan discovered through a quick investigation that Harold had recently loaned Donna $15,000 for her daughter's college tuition. When Susan presented this information after lunch, Judge Henderson's expression darkened considerably. The financial records we presented told their own damning story, dozens of large transfers from Dad's accounts to Harold over the years, totaling nearly $200,000, with no evidence of repayment. Bank statements showed Harold had visited Dad's bank with him 3 times in the final year, each visit followed by withdrawals of $5,000 to $10,000. As the day progressed, Judge Henderson's initial neutrality seemed to shift. She asked increasingly pointed questions of Theodore's witnesses while nodding thoughtfully during our presentations. When Theodore launched into his aggressive final argument demanding the entire estate be awarded to Harold, as the true intended heir, the judge watched with narrowed eyes. Susan's closing statement was calm and factual. Your Honor, Richard Parker was of sound mind when he created his will. He divided his assets thoughtfully between his children, considering their needs and his previous financial support of each. The evidence clearly shows that Mr. Parker provided substantial financial assistance to Harold throughout his adult life, while Beverly remained independent. The will reflects not manipulation, but a father's careful consideration of fairness. Judge Henderson announced she would review all evidence before making her ruling, suggesting we return the following morning. As she gathered her papers, Marvin suddenly approached the bench. Your Honor, if I may, he said respectfully. There is one additional document that may be relevant to these proceedings. Richard Parker left a sealed letter with specific instructions that it only be opened if his will was contested. The judge's eyebrows rose with interest. A sealed letter from the deceased. Why wasn't this mentioned earlier? The terms of Mr. Parker's instructions were very specific, Your Honor. The letter was only to be presented if absolutely necessary for resolving a dispute. Judge Henderson considered this for a moment. Bring the letter tomorrow morning. The court will determine its admissibility and relevance. As we filed out of the courtroom, Harold shot me a venomous look. This changes nothing. he hissed as he passed. "Dad would be ashamed of what you've done." His words stung, but for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever Dad had written in that letter, he had created it for exactly this situation. He had known somehow that Harold might challenge his wishes, and he had prepared. I didn't sleep that night. How could I, with my mind racing about the contents of Dad's mysterious letter, what had he written that he couldn't or wouldn't say while alive? Would it help my case? Or somehow make things worse? The uncertainty kept me pacing my apartment until dawn, rehearsing every possible scenario. By the time I arrived at the courthouse the next morning, my nerves were frayed to breaking point. Dark circles shadowed my eyes despite my attempts to conceal them with makeup. Linda met me at the entrance, squeezing my hand supportively as we made our way to the courtroom. "Whatever happens today, you've stood up for the truth," she whispered. "Your dad would be proud." The courtroom seemed even more crowded than the previous day. Word had apparently spread about the sealed letter-drawing curiosity seekers and a few distant relatives who hadn't bothered to attend before. Harold and Theodore were already seated, huddled in intense conversation. Harold looked uncharacteristically worried, repeatedly loosening his tie as if it were choking him. When Judge Henderson entered and took her seat, the room fell instantly silent. She surveyed the assembled parties before speaking. "Before I review yesterday's proceedings, I understand Mr. Williams has brought the sealed letter mentioned yesterday. Is that correct?" Marvin stood holding a cream-colored envelope. "Yes, Your Honor. As executor of Richard Parker's estate, I've kept this document sealed as instructed to be opened only in these specific circumstances." "Please approach the bench," Judge Henderson directed. Marvin walked forward, placing the envelope in the judge's outstretched hand. Richard was specific that this should only be read if Harold contested the will. He hoped it would never be necessary. Judge Henderson examined the envelope, noting the intact seal and Richard's signature across the flap. "The court will accept this document," she declared, carefully opening the envelope. The courtroom remained utterly silent as she read her expression, giving nothing away. After several minutes that felt like hours, she looked up. "I will read this letter in its entirety for the record," she announced. "The contents are directly relevant to these proceedings." She cleared her throat and began, "To whom it may concern. If this letter is being read, then my son Harold has contested my will as I feared he might. I write this with a heavy heart but clear mind, hoping to explain the decisions I made and prevent further damage to what remains of our family. First, I want to state unequivocally that I was under no undue influence when creating my will. Beverly has been a devoted daughter, caring for me through my illness out of love, not for financial gain. She has never once asked about inheritance or pressured me regarding my estate. The division of assets in my will was carefully considered, taking into account financial support I have already provided to each of my children. What Harold may not have disclosed is that over the past 15 years, I have loaned him over $200,000 for various business ventures, none of which have been repaid. These loans were made with the understanding that they would eventually be deducted from his inheritance. Included with this letter are copies of the loan agreements Harold signed, as well as bank records documenting these transfers. While I never demanded repayment during my lifetime, these substantial sums effectively represent an advance on Harold's inheritance. More painfully, I must disclose something I've protected Harold from sharing with the family. He has struggled with gambling addiction for over a decade. Many of his financial emergencies stemmed not from business setbacks, as he claimed, but from gambling debts. I paid off dangerous creditors twice to protect him money that was also never repaid. I love both my children deeply. The house goes to Beverly because she loves it and has helped maintain it for years. The cabin goes to Harold because I hope the peaceful setting might help him reflect and heal. The equal division of my retirement funds ensures both receive additional support. I write this not to punish Harold, but to protect Beverly from false accusations and ensure my wishes are respected. I only ask that if Harold truly needs help with his addiction, that assistance be offered with compassion. With enduring love for both my children, Richard Parker. As Judge Henderson finished reading, the courtroom erupted. Gasps and murmurs filled the air. Someone behind me whispered, "I knew something wasn't right about Harold's story." Theodore sat, frozen papers slipping from his fingers. Harold's face had drained of all color. "Lies!" he suddenly shouted, jumping to his feet. "Those are all lies. Dad would never betray me like this." "Mr. Parker, control yourself," Judge Henderson warned sharply. "You don't understand," Harold continued, his voice cracking. "I was going to pay him back. The next business was going to work. I just needed the capital from the house to make it happen." His outburst only confirmed everything Dad had written. Theodore tried to pull him back into his seat, but Harold shook him off, pointing at me accusingly. "She turned him against me. Dad would never have written that if she hadn't poisoned his mind." "Mr. Parker," Judge Henderson's voice cracked like a whip. "One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. Sit down immediately." Harold collapsed back into his chair, his face contorted with anger and shame. The judge held up additional documents from the envelope. "The court has reviewed the loan agreements and bank records included with Richard Parker's letter. All appear legitimate and properly executed." She turned to Theodore. "Counselor, do you wish to examine these documents?" Theodore, looking shell-shocked, rose slowly. "No, Your Honor. We'll need time to confer with our client." "Very well," Judge Henderson replied. "However, given the evidence presented, I'm prepared to rule on this matter immediately." She straightened her papers and addressed the courtroom. "Based on the testimony and evidence presented, including the deceased's own statement regarding his intentions, this court finds no evidence of undue influence in the creation of Richard Parker's will. The will shall be upheld as written, with Beverly Parker receiving the family home, Harold Parker receiving the lake cabin and retirement funds divided equally." She paused, then added, "Furthermore, the court recognizes the unpaid loans to Harold Parker as legitimate debts to the estate. These amounts shall be calculated and deducted from Harold's portion of the retirement funds. If the debt exceeds his share, a payment plan shall be established." Harold stood abruptly and stormed from the courtroom without looking at anyone, leaving Theodore to gather their papers hurriedly. The attorney offered a tight-lipped congratulations as he passed our table, clearly eager to distance himself from the disastrous outcome. I sat motionless, unable to fully process what had just happened. The vindication felt hollow in the face of the painful family secrets now exposed to everyone. Dad had kept Harold's gambling addiction private to protect him, and now it was court record known to extended family, neighbors, and strangers alike. After everyone else had filed out, I remained seated, staring at the empty judge's bench. Marvin approached slowly, tears visible in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Beverly," he said softly. "Keeping that letter secret was the hardest promise I ever made to your father. He hoped it would never be needed." "Why didn't he tell me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "About the loans, the gambling. I had no idea." "He was protecting both of you in his way," Marvin replied. "Harold from shame, and you from having to carry the burden of knowing. Richard always tried to shield those he loved." As the reality of our victory settled over me, I felt no triumph, only a profound exhaustion and sadness for what our family had become. In the days following the court ruling, I moved through life in a state of numbness. The victory felt hollow against the backdrop of family destruction. Harold had disappeared completely, not even returning to his hotel to collect his belongings after the trial. Theodore sent formal notification that he would no longer be representing Harold, washing his hands of the entire situation. I returned to the empty family home, now legally and unquestionably mine, but it felt different. Every room held memories that were now tinged with the knowledge of secrets and betrayals. Dad's armchair in the living room, where he used to read the Sunday paper. The kitchen table where we'd shared countless meals. His workshop in the garage where he taught me basic carpentry. All these spaces felt both comforting and painful simultaneously. The legal aftermath dragged on. Susan handled the final paperwork calculating the loans Harold owed to the estate. The total came to $217,000, with interest far exceeding his share of the retirement funds. Without Harold's participation, the court established a default judgment placing a lien against the lake cabin he'd inherited. I felt no satisfaction in this, only sadness that it had come to legal enforcement. Gradually, I returned to teaching full-time. My students provided a much-needed anchor to normalcy, their innocent enthusiasm for learning pulling me back from the edge of depression. Principal Wayne continued his support, checking in regularly without prying. My colleagues who had witnessed my struggle celebrated my return to full capacity with a small party in the teacher's lounge, the first time I genuinely smiled in months. Linda remained my rock, helping me sort through Dad's belongings when I finally felt strong enough to face the task. We created donation piles, keepsake boxes, and occasionally paused when an item triggered a particularly powerful memory. Finding Dad's collection of handwritten recipe cards, simple meals he'd learned to cook after Mom died, brought tears I couldn't control. "You know," Linda said gently as I clutched the recipe for Dad's famous Sunday pot roast. "Grief isn't linear. It's okay to still be mourning your dad while also processing what happened with Harold." She was right. The dual losses, Dad to cancer and Harold to greed and addiction, had created a complicated tangle of emotions I was only beginning to unravel. In the garage, I discovered Dad's unfinished woodworking projects. A jewelry box he'd been making for my birthday, a half-completed chess set with delicately carved pieces. Seeing these projects frozen in time, never to be completed by his hands, sparked something unexpected in me. I found myself returning to the garage each evening, studying his tools, his notes, his techniques. With the help of instructional videos and patient trial and error, I began learning woodworking. The focus required was therapeutic, forcing my mind away from painful thoughts. The physical creation of something beautiful from raw materials gave me a sense of connection to Dad I hadn't expected. When I completed the jewelry box, he'd started using his notes and adding my own small details. I felt a profound sense of healing. 6 months after the trial, a letter arrived with a Chicago postmark. Harold's handwriting on the envelope made my hand shake as I opened it. "Beverly," it began simply, "I don't expect forgiveness, but you deserve an explanation. After the trial, I checked myself into a rehabilitation facility for gambling addiction. The therapists here helped me see how my addiction warped everything. My relationship with Dad, with you, my perception of reality itself. Dad tried to help me for years without enabling me something I couldn't recognize until now. I twisted his love and support into something it wasn't because my addiction needed fuel. I'm sorry for the pain I caused, for the horrible things I said about you. None of it was true. You were the daughter Dad deserved while I was too consumed by my demons to even visit him properly in his final months. If you're willing, I'd like to meet when I complete the program. Not to ask for anything but to apologize in person. Either way, I want you to know I'm finally getting the help Dad always wanted me to accept. Harold." The letter left me conflicted. Part of me wanted nothing more to do with the brother who had put me through such hell. Another part remembered the Harold from childhood, before whatever demons took hold of him. After a week of consideration, I wrote back agreeing to meet on neutral ground, a coffee shop halfway between Minneapolis and Chicago. Our meeting was awkward at first, both of us uncertain how to bridge the chasm between us. Harold looked different. Thinner, humbler, his expensive watch and designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a button-down shirt. The flashy entrepreneur persona had disappeared. "I've been in therapy 3 times a week," he explained, staring into his coffee. "Gambling addiction, they say, is about escape and fantasy as much as money. I was trying to escape Dad's shadow, prove I could be successful on my own terms. The more I failed, the more I gambled to try to fix everything." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "All those years I thought you were building this amazing business empire." "Shame," he replied simply. "So much shame. It was easier to lie to keep up appearances. Dad was the only one who knew the truth, and even he didn't know the full extent until near the end." We talked for hours, painful truths, emerging between cautious sips of cooling coffee. I learned that Harold had started gambling in college, small bets, escalating to dangerous levels. By the time Dad was diagnosed with cancer, Harold owed money to people who made threats against his safety. The business meetings that prevented him from visiting Dad were often desperate attempts to secure more loans or place bets that might save him. Dad paid off the worst of the debts twice, Harold admitted. Made me promise to get help each time. I tried but never stuck with it. Always thought the next big win would solve everything. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself not exactly forgiving Harold, but understanding him in a way I hadn't before. Addiction had warped his perception, turned family love into transactional opportunities, twisted normal relationships into something unrecognizable. "I don't expect us to be close again," Harold said as we prepared to leave. "But I am getting better. The program is working this time because I finally want it for myself, not just to please Dad." "What will you do now?" I asked. "I got a job as an office manager at an accounting firm," he said with a small smile. "Entry level, starting over. No access to company finances, which is part of my recovery plan. I'm living in a small apartment attending daily support meetings." We parted with a tentative hug, agreeing to cautious contact moving forward. I set clear boundaries. I would support his recovery but wouldn't provide financial assistance that might enable relapse. Harold understood, even seemed relieved by the structure. Back home, I made a decision that Dad would have approved of. Using a portion of the retirement funds I'd inherited, I established a small foundation in Dad's name to help families affected by gambling addiction. The Richard Parker Family Support Fund provided counseling services and educational resources about the warning signs of addiction and its impact on families. Rebuilding trust with extended family who had believed Harold's accusations took time. I invited them to dinner at the family home, showing them Dad's letter with Harold's permission, explaining the addiction that had driven his behavior. Some, like Aunt Geraldine, were immediately remorseful for doubting me. Others took longer to come around, still uncomfortable with the painful truth about Harold's struggles. As the one-year anniversary of Dad's death approached, I organized a small memorial gathering in the backyard he had loved tending. Harold attended sober for 8 months by then, bringing a plant for Dad's garden. We shared memories of Dad, focusing on the positive legacy he'd left us, his integrity, his kindness, his unwavering love. Standing in that garden, surrounded by people who had known and loved my father, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since before his diagnosis. Dad had known his children so well, both our strengths and our weaknesses. He had created a contingency plan not out of mistrust, but out of love, trying to protect us both even after he was gone. The most valuable inheritance wasn't the house or the money, but the example Dad had set throughout his life. His thoughtfulness in preparing for potential conflict. His compassion in keeping Harold's struggles private until absolutely necessary. His fairness in accounting for past support when dividing his estate. I had chosen to keep the family home, making it truly mine with fresh paint and small renovations, while preserving the aspects Dad had loved. Harold was slowly making payments on his debt to the estate, each one a small step in his recovery journey. We weren't the close siblings we might have been without addiction's interference, but we were finding a new, more honest relationship built on the foundation Dad had tried to establish. Life would never return to what it had been before the cancer, before the lawsuit, before the revelations. But standing in Dad's garden, I could almost hear his voice reminding me that integrity matters more than winning, that standing up for what's right doesn't mean you have to be unkind. The sealed letter had changed everything, but in doing so, it had ultimately set us both free to build something more authentic from the ashes of what was lost. If you've ever had to stand up for what's right, even when it was painful, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Has a family conflict ever revealed truths you weren't prepared for? How did you handle it? Please like this video. If my story resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life experiences and share with someone who might need to hear that standing up for the truth is always worth it, even when it hurts. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that healing is possible even after the deepest betrayals.